another vegan YouTuber, à-bas-le-ciel, whose channel name I won't attempt to pronounce, but I will link it down below.
À-bas-le-ciel.
Greetings! So I just watched à-bas-le-ciel's video on the Israel-Palestine conflict.
À-bas-le-ciel.
Thank you also to à-bas-le-ciel.
À-bas-le-ciel.
Hey, one of the questions I've been asked most frequently, just in the last little while, is, are you French? And when the answer is no, I'm not French, the next question comes as, why? Why are you not French? Which is actually a completely reasonable question in my case. Right now, my daughter is connected to France in some way. It's not quite clear how, to be honest with you. And at the start of this semester, just a couple of weeks ago, I tried to enroll in French classes here at the University of Victoria, but I could not do so. Just by happenstance, it turns out that this semester, the university only scheduled one class, one room. So there were half as many seats as there usually would be. I walked into the office to see what was up with this French class because I'd enrolled via the computer. Here you select your courses through a computer interface. But I didn't think I could get into the class, and I went to the office and spoke to the secretary. She's a special secretary for the Department of French. And you could see she was a nationalist about it. And she said to me, I'm sorry, this is the situation, you can't get into the class, but I hope you won't be discouraged. I mean, I hope you know this isn't your last chance to study the French language. I hope you stick with it. She was completely sincere. And I said back to her completely sincerely, let me tell you, this is my last chance to learn the French language because as far as I know, a couple months from now, I'm moving to Japan. This is quite likely my last semester at this university and my last opportunity to learn this language now or ever. So yeah, it would have meant a lot to me if you guys had your act together and I could study French this term, but I can't, so I won't. Thanks for your time. I have studied the French language in the past when I was in grade school, and very memorably when I was in the process of applying to become a French citizen. So this is the bizarre answer to the question of why are you not French? The truth is that it comes down to one bad teacher and one bad bureaucrat, nobody taking responsibility for an awful government system over there in France. I feel bad in telling the story, not because it's a sad story, not because I feel that I can't give voice to some kind of tragedy that I'm trying to communicate to you, but actually because of how hilarious the story really is. Many, many points in the story were laugh out loud funny when I went through them. And I actually can't communicate that. I feel powerless to share with you just how ridiculous, absurd, and surreal my experience was in applying to become a French citizen and in going through the process of civic education and language education that was supposed to prepare me to become a citizen of the French Republic. It was so funny and so absurd and so ridiculous and so over the top. And I can't communicate that to you. I can't share that surreal situation with you. Being in a civics class, learning about the virtues of French democracy, the teacher, the instructor for the class, telling us all how secular France is, because even in a small city like this, there are 38 mosques. So when people in your home country say, France is a bad country because it's secular, you should say back to them, no, I'll have you know there are 38 mosques, even in this small city in France. Secularism means a mosque on every corner. And in that town it did. I mean, there pretty much was a mosque on every corner downtown there. A lot of them quite small, of course. Some big ones out in the suburbs. The teacher's interpretation of secularism was that Islam had special protection under the government. And he insisted on this, that the government supported all three religions in the world equally, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And even though my ability to communicate in French was so limited, I tried to engage him in a bit of a philosophical discussion, pointing out to him that no, the meaning of the word secular is not that the government supports Judaism, Christianity, and Islam equally. That is not the meaning of the word secular. The meaning of the word secular is that the French state is not involved with any of the religions. Government is separate from all religion. And, his insistence that there only were 3 religions in the world and so on is really became bizarre as it came up all the time. There were all these really political debates reflecting who was in the classroom and ultimately the coercive purpose of the course itself. Because as politely as possible, the purpose of the course was to say assimilate or get the hell out. Softball it all you want. That was the message this guy was there to deliver to us. And let me tell you, I'd have a lot of assimilating to do to fit into French culture. For me in particular, that would have been an uphill struggle. But, there were students in the class who bitterly denounced the French government for their laws on the veil. Wearing a headscarf and wearing a veil that covers your face for a Muslim woman, that's actually illegal in some contexts in France. And it's discouraged by the French government. So we got all these great speeches from the audience disputing with the professor. Got really upset, disputing with him the legality and morality of wearing the veil in France. And again, my ability to communicate in France was limited, but I nevertheless made the effort to say to him, "Look, I'm sorry. In this room, as it happens, nobody is Hindu and nobody is Buddhist." But secularism does not mean that Christianity, Judaism, and Islam are the state religion. Secularism means that the government has no religion and that all religions are equal outside of the state, etc. And I remember the first time I raised that issue, he said, well, India was not a former French colony. Now, France did have some colonies in Asia, but I remember I managed to come back, at the moment. I said, well, Haiti was a former French colony. What about the religion of voodoo? Are you telling me that secularism doesn't treat voodooism as equal to Judaism, Christianity, Islam? I said, I think they have many thousands of Buddhists and Hindus living in France, despite the quiddities of the colonial history. I said, look, this is not what the word secular means. This is not what you should be teaching new immigrants, because what he was teaching them directly was that Islam specifically had a special status as defended and funded by the French state. And again, when you're living through those situations, sometimes they're so over the top, they're so bizarre. You think if this was on television, people would think it was unrealistic. If this were a sketch, people would think it's too exaggerated. It can't possibly be real. One day, the professor brought pamphlets for an STD clinic, a clinic for sexually transmitted diseases. And he explained that here in France, we have special civil rights for these things. And not only do you have the right to be tested for free at this clinic, but you can be tested anonymously. So that way it's completely impossible that your husband finds out that you went to visit the clinic to get tested this way. And the front several rows of the audience, which is where the more observant Muslims would sit, the women who were wearing full veil, for whatever reason they preferred to sit in the front row, women who were wearing headscarves and so on. They got excited. They got verbally excited and jumped up in their seats and waved their hands. Oh, give me one. And they were asking for more copies so they could give them to their friends. And he didn't have enough copies. He hadn't brought enough copies of the promotional pamphlet for this STD clinic to this event. And there was actually a scramble. If you made a sketch out of that on Saturday Night Live, people would say it was offensive, and they would also just say unrealistic, too over the top, too unbelievable. I mean, in general in life, all of your opportunities are going to be created and destroyed by just one good person or one bad person in the right place in the right time. In the particular town I was living in France, when I went into the naturalization process, as they call it. The language education program there was a complete fraud. And I say fraud advisedly. A small number of people were in charge, but really 2 teachers with 1 supervisor. So we're not talking about a lot of people involved in some kind of scam here. But most of the students they had were in a position of powerlessness where they could not complain. Now, about 95% of the people going through that program were Muslim immigrants, were economic migrants from North Africa and other parts of the Muslim world. Not all of them were Muslim immigrants. There was one fellow from Tibet. I met and spoke with one fellow who was a refugee from Cambodia. There was one woman from Thailand. Those few people, those 2 teachers and that 1 supervisor, if they had been good people, if they had been competent at their job, I would be a French citizen today. But they weren't. They were bad people, and that was an absolutely terrible program. And in their legal position, the vast majority of students wouldn't say or do anything to question what was happening in the program. And again, I've got to make clear, I'm not trying to reform or radicalize what they're doing. I just want a legitimate French education. So I mentioned in the paperwork legally, they were obliged to give me a curriculum, a lesson plan, basically. And then I was supposed to sign this lesson plan. I was supposed to agree to it. And then I would be bound to attend the lessons and participate in that plan. And I could not get them to give me a curriculum. And this is part of the problem, because these teachers would just show up and improvise off the top of their head. There was no textbook. There were no lessons. There was no grammar. There was no structure of any kind. If they decided to photocopy something, they would do it during their coffee break, extempore. They would think of something at the last minute and do it. But mostly the teachers would just show up and in plain language, they would BS. They would bullshit. They would make things up. And you'd be stuck there for hours. And at the time, I had every motivation. I was completely exhausted from taking care of my newborn daughter and managing my relationship with my wife, who was none too gradually becoming my ex-wife. But despite all those things, it's very strange. Like, we have this idea in the West that if you complain, if you're a nonconformist, if you challenge authority, then you're some kind of maverick, you're some kind of radical. But this has been one of many situations in my life where I am challenging authority. But what I want really is the luxury of being a conformist. I would have been completely happy to be in that program and just focus, work hard, learn French. I wanted nothing else. Here, when I came back to this part of Canada and I enrolled in Chinese, I had no motivation whatsoever to challenge authority. I was just here to learn Chinese. No reason to criticize the teacher, the professors, or anything. But the program was a disaster. And I ended up having to take a formal complaint to the dean and a formal complaint to Parliament. And as a result of my complaints here, by the way, things changed. There's reform going on right now in this university because of the written complaint and the verbal complaints I brought to higher levels. Too late for me, though. It's not going to help me. My life still gets destroyed. And in France, as I say, the students were powerless. They were the captives of the teachers and bureaucrats who controlled the program. And if the program was bad, and in my particular town, particular time, with these few particular teachers, this program was bad. It was absolutely terrible. The only way for me to compensate, there were no checks and balances, there was no oversight, nobody was responsible to anyone for anything. The only way to compensate would have been for me to leave France. And when I say leave, I don't mean on vacation. To close the apartment, lose all my furniture, lose my fixed address, lose my telephone number, and then re-enter France, rent a new apartment, get a new telephone number, a new fixed address, something like a bank account, and try to prove that that's your address and so on, and begin the whole immigration process again from page 1. Anyway, I went through this series of surreal scenarios in applying to become a French citizen, but because of one bad teacher, because of one bad unit in the French bureaucracy that is now an opportunity I will never have.